Why would a regime suddenly tell 40 million of its own citizens that enemy fighter jets are flying directly over their heavily guarded capital? When air defense sirens begin wailing across Tehran in the dead of night, it means the invisible shield protecting the heart of the government has just been shattered. Before we pull back the curtain on this massive military operation, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like on the video, and share this breakdown with anyone who wants to understand what is really happening in the Middle East right now. I read every single comment, so drop your thoughts below as we move through this analysis together. When state broadcasters in an authoritarian country admit that their central airspace is under threat, they are not just reporting the news, they are preparing the population for a new and dangerous phase of conflict. For decades, the skies above Tehran have been treated as an untouchable fortress, protected by layers of radar, surface-to-air missiles, and elite military squadrons. Border towns might experience sporadic violence, and remote military bases in the desert might face occasional strikes, but the capital has always remained a symbol of absolute regime security. That illusion evaporated at 4 o'clock in the morning local time. Residents across both the eastern and western districts of Tehran were awakened by the thunderous roar of air defense batteries firing into the dark sky. This was not an isolated radar malfunction or a localized response to a stray drone. Official state media outlets, including broadcasters closely aligned with the military leadership, confirmed that anti-aircraft networks were fully activated across the entire metropolitan area to counter what they described as hostile reconnaissance aircraft. The phrase itself is chilling when you unpack it carefully. When a government tells its people that air defenses are active against enemy reconnaissance, they are admitting something profound. They are acknowledging that unknown aircraft, possibly American or Allied, are operating directly above the most heavily guarded city in the nation. This is not a skirmish on a distant border. This is a violation of the most sacred security bubble the regime possesses. To understand why this moment is so dramatic, we have to look at where the actual attack began. While the citizens of Tehran were watching glowing tracer rounds arc over their rooftops, the primary force of the American offensive was falling hundreds of miles to the south. In a highly choreographed 90-minute window, United States Central Command unleashed a continuous wave of fifth-generation strike packages across Iran's southern and eastern territories. 90 minutes might sound like a brief skirmish to a casual observer, but in modern warfare, 90 minutes of sustained precision bombing can paralyze an entire military apparatus. Think about what can happen in an hour and a half when you have stealth bombers, electronic warfare jets, and cruise missile platforms working in perfect sequence. The official target list was carefully selected to cripple the regime's ability to fight a coordinated war. Combat aircraft aimed specifically at command centers, air defense radar sites, ballistic missile and drone storage facilities, and coastal surveillance hubs. This was not a symbolic show of force designed to send a political message. It was a systematic effort to blind the regime, destroy its long-range firepower, and sever the communications links between high-level commanders and their frontline units. Command centers are where the orders originate. Air defense sites are what keeps the sky closed. Missile and drone capabilities are the actual weapons that get launched at tankers and American partners in the Gulf. Coastal surveillance is the eyes that let Iran track shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. When you take out all 4 of those categories in the same 90-minute window, you are not poking the regime. You are trying to dismantle its entire regional military nervous system in one night. The geography of this campaign tells a clear story about American strategic goals. At the very center of the target map sits Bandar Abbas, the massive naval and military hub located right on the shoreline of the Strait of Hormuz. Bandar Abbas is the beating heart of Iran's maritime power. From this port, speedboats, submarines, and anti-ship missile crews operate to control one of the most important shipping lanes on the planet. Striking this facility directly weakens the regime's grip on global oil transit routes. Alongside Bandar Abbas, American munitions pounded Greater Tunb Island, a fortified rocky outpost near the mouth of the strait that Iranian commanders have boasted is an unsinkable aircraft carrier. For years, the regime has called these islands their permanent military assets that no enemy could touch. Heavy explosions shattered coastal defense batteries and cruise missile installations built atop that island. While the landmass itself obviously cannot sink, the military hardware that once threatened passing commercial tankers and military warships was effectively turned to scrap metal in a matter of seconds. The psychological impact of that alone is significant. The islands Iran bragged about being invincible just took direct hits, and the weapons sitting on top of them were obliterated. The destruction did not stop at the coastline. State media reports and independent observers documented heavy blasts spreading far across the map. Strikes hit military infrastructure on Qeshm Island, as well as southeastern installations in Chabahar and Konarak. Most alarmingly for the leadership in Tehran, the strikes reached deep inside the country's interior. In the inland city of Semnan, a storage facility was destroyed. And the main building of a regional airport suffered damage from incoming strikes. Even when an attacking force focuses strictly on command nodes and military storage depots, the destructive reach of a 90-minute nationwide air campaign shows how vulnerable the country's defense grid has become. When explosions are happening simultaneously along the coast and deep in the interior, the defending military cannot concentrate its remaining defenses in one place. They are forced to spread thin, which makes every subsequent wave of strikes even more effective. In the aftermath of these strikes, Iranian authorities released statements emphasizing that no casualties occurred at several of the inland locations. Yet war is never without human suffering, and no bombing campaign of this scale is entirely bloodless. Figures released by the country's own health ministry confirmed that at least 35 people were killed and more than 300 were injured during this latest intensification of fighting. These numbers represent the minimum floor of the human toll, reported directly by the government under attack. I want to pause here because this matters enormously. Behind every single statistical count is a broken family, a lost livelihood, and a shattered community. When a health ministry under an embattled regime publishes casualty figures, they are not exaggerating for sympathy. They are documenting the real cost of war. It is essential to remember that even when a conflict is driven by geopolitical struggles and state-level aggression, the physical violence ultimately falls upon real people living on the ground. 35 dead and 300 wounded are not abstract numbers. They are teachers, shopkeepers, parents, and children whose lives were ended or forever changed because of decisions made in distant capital cities. The technical execution of an operation like this requires astonishing precision and coordination. To strike dozens of targets across hundreds of miles without losing a single manned aircraft, military planners use a layered tactical approach. First, specialized electronic warfare aircraft and suppression units enter the battle zone to hunt down enemy radar signals. They jam defensive frequencies or fire specialized anti-radiation missiles that destroy surface-to-air radar dishes the moment they turn on. Once the defensive shield is blinded, heavy precision strike fighters enter the airspace using advanced targeting, pods, and satellite guidance to drop munitions precisely onto command bunkers and weapon warehouses. For the deepest and most fortified targets, standoff weapons are used, allowing pilots to launch long-range cruise missiles from safe distances far outside the reach of remaining anti-aircraft batteries. This seamless integration of suppression, precision delivery, and standoff capability creates a wall of firepower that older air defense networks simply cannot survive. The sensor-to-shooter chain involved here is operating at a level that most people cannot fully appreciate. We are talking about aircraft detecting a specific building from miles away, sending targeting data through encrypted networks, and delivering a bomb through a window while dodging whatever surface-to-air missiles might still be active. This is not carpet bombing. This is surgical removal of specific military capabilities, and it represents decades of technological evolution in how wars are fought. As the smoke cleared over Bandar Abbas and the desert installations of Semnan, the leadership in Tehran faced a crucial decision. They could absorb the blow and try to preserve what was left of their infrastructure, or they could strike back immediately to prove to their domestic supporters that they were still capable of resistance. Within just a few hours, the answer became obvious. The regime chose retaliation, and they aimed it directly at American partners scattered across the region. If you are finding this in-depth analysis valuable and want to help us keep producing factual, well-researched defense breakdowns without the hype, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Your engagement directly fuels our ability to dig deeper into stories like this one. The Iranian military's response came in the form of a synchronized retaliatory wave aimed at American military installations scattered across 3 different regional partner nations. Television broadcasts in Tehran quickly announced that the Revolutionary Guard had successfully struck Patriot missile batteries, fuel depots, and fighter jet ramps in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. For a viewer watching state television inside Iran, it looked like a powerful and devastating counterattack that evened the score. The graphics were dramatic, the claims were bold, and the message was clear. We struck back, and we hurt them. However, when we examine the actual data recorded by independent radar logs and regional defense ministries, a completely different reality emerges. This gap between propaganda broadcasts and verifiable fact is one of the most important patterns to recognize in any modern conflict. In Kuwait, Iranian commanders claimed their forces had blasted fuel tanks and Patriot air defense systems at Ali al-Salam Air Base. Yet the Kuwaiti government officially reported that its integrated missile defense network had detected and intercepted 4 incoming cruise missiles and 21 attack drones before they ever reached their targets. Not a single Iranian munition breached the defensive perimeter to cause damage at the airbase. 4 cruise missiles and 21 drones intercepted. Those are specific numbers tied to radar tracks and fire control logs. This is not a vague denial. This is a country publishing verifiable data to counter a false narrative. A similar pattern unfolded in Bahrain, where state media in Tehran claimed that attack drones had destroyed sensitive radar equipment and defensive batteries at Sheikh Issa Air Base. Once again, neither regional authorities nor American military officials reported any damage to the facility, with defensive systems successfully screening the incoming flights. The Iranian media machine was painting a picture of triumph, while the actual bombs and drones were being shot out of the sky before they could cause any harm. The most exaggerated claim of the night involved Jordan. Iranian military spokesman broadcast an explicit statement claiming they had launched advanced Khyber-Shekin ballistic missiles at a major airbase in Jordan, supposedly destroying an American command center and a storage ramp for fighter jets. The level of detail in their claim was remarkable. They named the specific weapon system, identified the exact base, and described the precise targets they allegedly destroyed. In reality, the Jordanian military confirmed that its anti-aircraft batteries had tracked and shot down 8 incoming Iranian missiles in the upper atmosphere, preventing any impact on military infrastructure. 8 missiles intercepted. The debris likely scattered across empty desert. No command center was touched. No fighter jet ramp was scratched. This massive gap between what an authoritarian regime claims on domestic television and what actually happens in the skies is a defining feature of modern warfare. Regional partner states like Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan are protected by some of the most sophisticated, densely packed Patriot missile and radar networks on Earth. Designed specifically to track multiple high-speed targets and calculate kinetic intercept solutions in milliseconds, these systems effectively neutralized the retaliatory salvo before it could score a tactical victory. The Patriot system works by detecting an incoming threat, calculating its trajectory, and launching an interceptor missile that physically collides with the target in midair. When you hear that, Kuwait intercepted 25 total threats, or Jordan intercepted 8, you are hearing the result of computers and radars and missile crews working perfectly in real time against a determined attack. Despite their inability to penetrate regional air defenses, Iranian forces did manage to score one specific technical success that deserves objective evaluation. In the southwestern province of Khuzestan, anti-aircraft crews successfully tracked and shot down an American MQ-9 Reaper drone over the town of Andameshk. The MQ-9 is an expensive, highly capable reconnaissance and strike platform, and bringing one down proves that parts of Iran's low to medium altitude air defense network remain dangerous. This is not a cheap quadcopter. This is a multi-million-dollar military asset with advanced sensors and communications gear. However, because the Reaper is a remotely piloted vehicle, the incident cost the attacking forces 0 human lives. There is no pilot in a cockpit breathing oxygen and making split-second decisions. There is an operator sitting in a ground control station, potentially thousands of miles away. From a broader strategic perspective, if a defending nation can only manage to destroy unmanned drones while its own coastal command centers, naval bases, and radar stations are being systematically demolished, it becomes obvious which side commands the skies. Shooting down a drone is a tactical victory. Losing your entire command and control infrastructure in exchange is a strategic catastrophe. While missiles were trading places in the air, an equally important struggle was unfolding across the waters of the Persian Gulf. This maritime confrontation represents one of the most critical and underreported developments of the entire conflict. United States Central Command has begun actively enforcing a strict naval blockade to prevent the Iranian government from exporting oil and importing weapons through the Strait of Hormuz. In the first 24 hours of this operation, American forces demonstrated exactly what their rules of engagement look like in practice. 2 commercial shipping vessels that complied with military instructions were safely redirected away from restricted waters. A third ship, however, chose to test the blockade. The difference in outcomes between compliance and defiance was stark and immediate. The MT Thelma, a commercial oil tanker sailing under the flag of Curaçao, ignored repeated radio warnings and attempted to make a run toward Karg Island. Karg Island is the single most vital energy export terminal in Iran, responsible for loading the vast majority of the country's crude oil onto ocean-going vessels. Without Karg Island functioning, Iran's ability to sell oil on the global market collapses almost entirely. To stop the MT Thelma without causing a massive environmental disaster or killing the civilian crew on board, American commanders executed a surgical strike. An armed aircraft fired precision Hellfire missiles directly into the smokestack of the moving tanker. The explosion destroyed the ship's engine exhaust and propulsion systems, leaving the vessel powerless and adrift in the water without breaching the oil cargo tanks below. Think about the precision required for that shot. A moving ship on the open water, and the missile hits not the hull, not the bridge, not the cargo holds, but the smokestack specifically to disable the engines without spilling a drop of oil. This method of targeting an isolated mechanical component of a moving ship shows an extraordinary level of sensor accuracy and operational discipline. The message to the global shipping industry was unmistakable. Comply with the blockade, and you will be redirected safely. Attempt to break the blockade, and your engines will be destroyed. It is a calibrated, almost elegant form of naval enforcement that minimizes collateral damage while achieving the strategic objective. The financial dimension of this war is staggering and often overlooked in the rush to cover explosions and missile launches. During recent congressional testimony, the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, placed an official on the record price tag on the operations against Iran. According to the Pentagon's figures, the campaign has already cost the American taxpayer roughly $37.5 billion. Let that number sink in for a moment. Every single Hellfire missile fired into a smokestack, every flight hour of a fifth-generation stealth fighter, every Patriot interceptor launched over Kuwait, and every naval deployment in the Strait of Hormuz adds millions of dollars to that total every day. A single cruise missile can cost over $1 million. A single flight hour for an advanced stealth aircraft can run into the tens of thousands. Multiply that across a 90-minute wave involving dozens of aircraft. Over $1 million. A single flight hour for an advanced stealth aircraft can run into the tens of thousands. Multiply that across a 90-minute wave involving dozens of aircraft. And hundreds of munitions. And you begin to understand how the costs accumulate so rapidly. How long a government can sustain an expense of that magnitude without triggering political pushback at home is a question that will ultimately shape the outcome of the war just as much as the tactical battles on the ground. Wars are not just won on the battlefield. They are won or lost in budget committees and congressional hearings back home. This sudden explosion of violence across both land and sea is even more shocking when you look at the diplomatic, much as the tactical battles on the ground. Wars are not just won on the battlefield. They are won or lost in budget committees and congressional hearings back home. This sudden explosion of violence across both land and sea is even more shocking when you look at the diplomatic timeline that preceded it. The current conflict originally erupted in late February with a series of joint airstrikes against Iranian military infrastructure. Those initial battles eventually calmed down, leading to a temporary truce in April. There was genuine hope, however fragile, that the worst was over. Less than a month before this latest 90-minute bombing wave, diplomats from Washington and Tehran actually signed a formal memorandum of understanding. That document was intended to extend the ceasefire and create a roadmap toward permanent peace. Negotiations. A memorandum of understanding is diplomatic language for both sides putting something in writing that they promised to honor. Signatures were affixed, statements were issued. The world breathed a cautious sigh of relief. Somewhere between the signing of that document and the activation of air defense sirens in Tehran, the diplomatic track completely collapsed. Both governments are now accusing one another of violating the terms of the agreement, proving that written understandings mean very little when fundamental strategic interests collide. The ink was barely dry on the peace framework before the missiles started flying again. We are living through a historic moment where warfare is changing faster than ever before. So if you appreciate getting a calm, evidence-based explanation of these complex events without dramatic noise, make sure to like, share this video with a friend, and subscribe so you never miss an update. Your support makes this detailed, source-driven journalism possible. As the conflict intensifies, legal experts and military observers are raising questions about dramatic noise. Make sure to share this video with a friend, and subscribe so you never miss an update. Your support makes this detailed, source-driven journalism possible. As the conflict intensifies, legal experts and military observers are raising questions about how far the bombing campaign might expand next. Reports circulating in Washington suggest that military leaders are considering broadening the target list beyond purely military sites, like radar dishes and naval bases. There is growing discussion about striking dual-use infrastructure, facilities such as power grids, highway bridges, and energy distribution networks that serve both civilian populations and military logistics. Targeting dual-use infrastructure sits in a very gray area of international humanitarian law. The legal framework known as the law of armed conflict makes distinctions between purely military objectives and civilian objects. A radar station is clearly military. A hospital is clearly civilian. But a power plant that provides electricity to both a missile factory and a nearby city of 2 million people occupies a much murkier legal territory. While destroying a bridge might prevent enemy troop movements, it also cuts off food, medicine, and emergency services for ordinary citizens. If the air campaign expands into these daily civilian support networks, it will likely trigger a much stronger wave of diplomatic criticism from the international community. Countries that have remained neutral or quietly supportive might shift their positions. The United Nations might convene emergency sessions. The global reaction would be genuinely different from what we have seen so far. To truly grasp the scale of what is happening in the Middle East, we have to recognize that this conflict does not exist in a vacuum. It is unfolding at a time when military resources and air defense systems are facing extreme pressure across the entire globe. While American aircraft were striking Bandar Abbas, a completely separate and equally intense air war was raging in Eastern Europe. In Ukraine, Russian missile forces launched a deadly strike against a commercial shipping vessel in the southern port city of Odessa, killing at least 10 people on board a ship carrying grain. Local officials confirmed that continuous strikes on Odessa have claimed dozens of civilian lives in recent weeks alone. 28 people were killed in that single city in just 1 month. These are not soldiers. Launched a deadly strike against a commercial shipping vessel in the southern port city of Odessa, killing at least 10 people on board a ship carrying grain. Local officials confirmed that continuous strikes on Odessa have claimed dozens of civilian lives in recent weeks alone. 28 people were killed in that single city in just 1 month. These are not soldiers. On a front line, these are dock workers, sailors, and port staff trying to keep global food supplies moving. At the exact same time, Ukrainian forces launched one of their largest long-range drone offensives of the war, sending hundreds of unmanned aircraft deep into Russian territory. Ukrainian drones struck an oil depot, multiple logistics centers around Moscow, and naval targets in the Black Sea. One massive strike hit a giant distribution warehouse near Moscow, belonging to Russia's largest e-commerce retailer, causing massive fires, killing 8 people and inflicting economic damages estimated at over 100 billion rubles. That is one of the costliest single strikes on Russian commercial infrastructure of the entire war. We look at these events not to distract from the Middle East, but to highlight a critical global reality. The world is currently witnessing 2 massive, highly sophisticated air campaigns happening at the same time. Both conflicts are consuming interceptor missiles, radar components, and precision bombs at a rate that tests the manufacturing limits of the world's biggest military powers. Factories in the United States and Europe are running around the clock to produce enough Patriot interceptors and cruise missiles to sustain both theaters simultaneously. The global supply chain for advanced munitions is being stretched in ways not seen since the Second World War. When we pull back and look at the strategic behavior of the Iranian leadership, we see a government attempting to pursue 2 contradicting paths at the same time. On one hand, they want to project an image of defiance, firing ballistic missiles at regional neighbors and telling their citizens that their military is standing strong against a global superpower. State television is filled with triumphant music and graphics showing Iranian missiles supposedly destroying American bases. On the other hand, they know that their domestic economy is fragile and their military infrastructure is being steadily demolished, which was why they were willing to sign a ceasefire memorandum only weeks ago. This dual-track strategy is rapidly falling apart. A regime cannot easily negotiate. A quiet diplomatic exit while its coastal command centers are burning and its main oil export routes are blocked by warships. Every night that precision airstrikes remove another node of their military communication grid, the leadership loses more of its capacity to control events or calibrate its response. You cannot simultaneously wage a calibrated shadow war and pursue serious peace negotiations if the actual command and control apparatus that would let your military calibrate anything is getting dismantled piece by piece. This is the trap Tehran currently appears to be caught inside of. The pattern keeps repeating. Air defenses activated over the capital, retaliatory strikes claimed against Gulf partners, independent intercept numbers from those same partners telling a much smaller story, and the gap between propaganda and reality growing wider with each passing night. The pressure on regional stability is also causing serious concern among neighboring countries that have previously tried to act as peacemakers. Pakistan, which shares a long border with Iran and spent months trying to facilitate diplomatic communication between Washington and Tehran, recently issued a formal statement through its foreign ministry. The Pakistani government expressed deep concern over the continuing strikes, warning that the ongoing destruction of military and transport infrastructure is pushing the broader region toward an uncontrollable conflict. Think about the significance of that statement. A country that was actually at the table trying to help broker peace is now watching that same peace process get blown apart in real time and saying so publicly. When a regional mediator publicly expresses alarm about the trajectory of a war, it is a strong signal that diplomatic channels have broken down and that neighboring states are preparing for a wider regional crisis. Pakistan is not a distant observer. It shares a physical border with Iran. It has its own security concerns and its own military to protect. If the conflict spills over or creates refugee flows, Pakistan would be among the first countries affected. Global financial markets are also watching the situation in the Persian Gulf with rising anxiety. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow maritime choke point through which approximately 1/5 of the world's total petroleum supply passes every single day. Right now, that waterway is the scene of two competing strategies: Iran's efforts to disrupt shipping and assert regional dominance, and the American naval blockade designed to halt Iranian trade. You have two competing blockades effectively squeezing the same stretch of water, and global energy markets are pricing that risk in almost real time. Every time a tanker is disabled by military fire or forced to alter its course, energy traders around the world adjust their risk models. Every night of strikes on coastal infrastructure adds another variable to the calculation. Even if you live thousands of miles away from Tehran or Bandar Abbas, the economic shockwaves generated by these 90-minute strike waves eventually show up in the price of fuel, electricity, and transported goods in your local economy. This is not just a headline. This is a variable, feeding directly into what you pay at the pump, what you pay to heat your home, and what you pay for goods transported by ships that must navigate these dangerous waters. As we look toward the future of this conflict, there is one specific geographic location that stands out as the ultimate potential flashpoint. Over the past several weeks, both President Trump and senior defense officials have repeatedly mentioned a specific Iranian facility that could become the primary target of the next escalation phase. That site is known locally as Qeshm Island, often referred to by American analysts as Pickax Mountain. Situated in the arid landscape south of Iran's famous Natanz nuclear complex, Pickax Mountain is not a traditional military base built on the surface. It is a sprawling, deeply buried underground facility carved beneath hundreds of meters of solid granite rock. The geology itself is the primary defense. Granite is one of the hardest rocks on Earth, and hundreds of meters of it can absorb the impact of even the most powerful conventional bombs. Satellite analysis and international nuclear monitoring reports indicate that heavy construction and tunnel excavation at Pickax Mountain began several years ago, specifically designed to withstand attacks from conventional bunker-busting munitions. The Institute for Science and International Security, a respected nuclear monitoring organization, has published detailed satellite imagery analysis showing the extensive tunnel networks being carved into the mountain. The Iranian government insists that the underground tunnels are used strictly for building and storing centrifuge equipment used in civil energy research. However, Western intelligence agencies suspect that the extreme depth and heavy reinforcement of the mountain complex make it a potential sanctuary for a covert, military-grade nuclear program. Because international inspectors have never been granted full, unhindered access to the innermost chambers of the facility, the exact capabilities hidden inside the mountain remain a subject of intense suspicion. The regime's refusal to allow complete transparency is what fuels the darkest interpretations of what might be happening inside those granite walls. The rhetoric surrounding Pickax Mountain has reached a boiling point. President Trump publicly warned that the United States is prepared to destroy the facility, explicitly stating that Iranian forces should be ready for such an operation. The quote was direct and unambiguous. The president told interviewers that they were going to take out Pickax Mountain and that the Iranians should be ready. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reinforced that warning by stating before Congress that the American military possesses the specialized engineering and weapon capabilities required to reach and destroy any bunker on Earth, no matter how deeply it is buried under solid rock. That is an extraordinary claim backed by the existence of weapons, like the massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bomb specifically designed to burrow through reinforced concrete and granite before detonating. In response, Iran's elite Qeshm Al-Anbiya Air Defense Command issued a fiery public counter-warning. They declared that any strike against Pickax Mountain would cross a line of no return, triggering an all-out regional explosion that would target American and Allied assets across the entire Middle East without limitation. The language was apocalyptic. The message was designed to communicate that this specific mountain is the red line beyond which there is no going back. That mountain buried in the desert now stands as the defining symbol of the central tension in this war. We are watching two powerful adversaries move closer to a direct confrontation over the most heavily defended and strategically vital assets in the region. Whether the sirens in Tehran remain quiet tonight or scream back to life, whether the naval blockade in the Gulf allows oil to flow or shuts down trade completely, and whether the deeply buried tunnels of Pickax Mountain become the next target of a 90-minute strike package, are questions that will be answered by decisions being made right now in military command centers. The story is still being written in real time. Every night brings new strike reports, new claims, new denials, and new evidence of how this war is reshaping the Middle East. The story of this conflict is not just about sophisticated aircraft, radar frequencies, or missile intercept logs. It is about the fragility of peace in a highly interconnected world where a single tactical miscalculation can unleash devastating consequences across continents. It is about the human cost measured in lives lost and families shattered. It is about the economic cost measured in billions of dollars in disrupted global trade. It is about the diplomatic cost measured in broken agreements and lost opportunities for negotiation. As the smoke settles, over the shoreline of the Strait of Hormuz and residents in Tehran look anxiously toward the night sky, the reality of modern war stands clear before us. It is a slow, methodical test of strength, endurance, and human cost, where every broken defense line brings the region one step closer to an unpredictable future. What happens next will be determined not just by generals and politicians, but by the resilience of ordinary people caught in the middle and by the willingness of global powers to prioritize peace over escalation. Thank you for trusting this channel to guide you through these complex events with honesty, clarity, and a commitment to separating fact from claim.